I came home smelling like birthday cake and barbecue smoke, still wearing one of those cheap little paper party hats my grandson had jammed onto my head earlier that afternoon. And the first thing I noticed was the silence. Not normal silence, the wrong kind. No waterfall trickling, no soft splash near the lily pads, no koi surfacing because they heard my truck pull into the driveway. Just dead air. I stood there for maybe 3 seconds too long, keys still in my hand, staring at my backyard through the kitchen window, like my brain refused to process what my eyes were seeing. Because where my pond used to be, there was just dirt. A giant mound of gray construction fill, crushed gravel, tire tracks and wet clay spread across 18 years of work, like somebody had buried a body back there. And planted right in the middle of it, like a little plastic gravestone, was a laminated HOA notice zip-tied to a wooden stake. Unauthorized water feature removed due to health and safety concerns. Health and safety, that's what they called it. Like my koi pond was leaking nuclear waste into the neighborhood. I walked out there in complete disbelief, shoes sinking into fresh mud. And one of my koi was still half exposed near the edge of the pile. Orange scales covered in dirt, barely moving. That image still sits in my chest like a brick. This wasn't some decorative Home Depot pond kit some retired guys slapped together during quarantine. I built that pond myself over 18 years, one weekend at a time, back when my knees still worked right and my wife was still alive. Dug the basin by hand, laid every stone myself, installed the pumps, filtration, drainage channels, all of it. That pond survived storms, droughts, raccoons, freezing winters. Even one idiot teenager who thought throwing beer cans into it was funny. It outlasted everything except the Maple Ridge Estates Homeowners Association and their newest emperor, Gerald Whitmore. Now, Gerald was the kind of HOA president who treated neighborhood bylaws like sacred scripture, wore tucked-in polo shirts to community cookouts, drove around in a golf cart like he was patrolling a forward operating base. And the remarkable thing was he didn't even live near my property. His house sat 3 streets over. But every month he'd find a new reason to stick violation notices in my mailbox. Grass height inconsistency, excessive natural landscaping, visual distraction from neighborhood uniformity. Visual distraction because apparently flowers and fish offend people. But the pond really got under his skin. Not because it was dangerous, and definitely not because of mosquitoes. That was nonsense. The water circulated constantly through biological filters, cleaner than most hotel pools. No, Gerald hated it because people stopped to admire it. Kids liked it. Neighbors took pictures beside it during Halloween. Delivery drivers slowed down to look. In a neighborhood obsessed with beige sameness, my pond stood out. And men like Gerald cannot tolerate anything they didn't personally authorize. That's the thing about people with small authority exercised badly. Eventually, they confuse rules with power, and power with permission. I found out later they had waited until they knew I'd be gone for the birthday party. One of the HOA board wives saw photos my daughter posted online and told Gerald the house would be empty all afternoon. So while I was helping my grandson smash birthday cake into his tiny face for the first time, Gerald hired excavation contractors to destroy my backyard. They brought in skid steers and dump trucks and enough fill dirt to suffocate the entire pond system in under 2 hours. No city permit, no environmental inspection, no court order. Just a couple of angry retirees playing dictator with landscaping equipment. I remember kneeling in the mud after sunset, hands covered in wet clay, digging through the dirt with a garden shovel like some desperate lunatic, hoping maybe a few koi had survived underneath somewhere. All I found was broken pipe, crushed stone, and silence. Then I noticed something else. One of the underground overflow drains sticking out near the edge of the dirt pile had been snapped clean in half. And that's when something clicked in my head. Because unlike Gerald Whitmore and his little HOA operation, I actually understood how this neighborhood was built. I knew where the runoff went during spring storms. I knew why my property sat lower than every house around it. And standing there in the rain-soaked dirt, staring at that broken drainage pipe, I started laughing out loud like an absolute crazy person. They didn't just bury my pond. They buried the one thing keeping this entire neighborhood dry. Here's something most people don't realize, and this is where HOAs get themselves into serious trouble. An HOA generally cannot enter private property and destroy permanent structures without a specific legal process. Notices, hearings, opportunities to appeal, sometimes city involvement depending on drainage classifications and environmental codes. But guys like Gerald love a particular loophole, and the loophole is intimidation. Most homeowners panic the moment they see official-looking paperwork with bold lettering and legal language, so they comply before asking a single question. That's the whole psychological game. HOAs rely less on actual legal authority and more on the assumption that nobody wants an expensive fight. From a legal perspective, what they did to my pond was worse than vandalism, because they had altered a functional drainage ecosystem tied into the subdivision's runoff management. Once water diversion systems are involved, insurance companies, municipal engineers, and environmental agencies start paying attention very fast. And nothing terrifies a suburban HOA board more than engineers carrying clipboards and insurance adjusters using phrases like negligent modification of stormwater infrastructure. The lesson? Never assume something labeled decorative is purely decorative. And never underestimate how quickly arrogance collapses once property damage starts costing real money. That night, the weather forecast changed from scattered showers to severe storm warning. I sat on my back porch staring at that giant dirt grave while thunder rolled somewhere off in the distance, the kind that vibrates through patio furniture. Any normal person probably would have called a lawyer immediately, maybe filed police reports, maybe gone door to door at 3 in the morning, making everyone's life miserable. But honestly, I didn't have to do anything. Nature already had an appointment scheduled with Maple Ridge Estates. Around midnight, the rain started. Soft, steady, almost peaceful at first, tapping against the gutters and soaking into the fresh construction dirt. By 2 in the morning, water was already pooling near the curb outside my house. That had never happened before. Not once in 18 years. Because normally all that runoff flowed downhill through the underground drainage channels connected directly into my pond basin, where the overflow filtration system slowed everything down before gradually feeding excess water into the municipal drain line. It was essentially a giant natural retention system disguised as landscaping. But Gerald and his demolition crew had buried the basin, crushed 2 runoff pipes, and compacted the soil with heavy equipment. All that water suddenly had nowhere to go, and rainwater is patient, right up until the moment it isn't. By sunrise, the neighborhood Facebook page had turned into pure panic. Videos of flooded driveways, photos of standing water halfway up garage doors. Somebody posted a picture of actual ducks swimming near the community mailbox, which I will admit almost made me choke on my coffee. Gerald, meanwhile, was still pretending everything was under control. Around 9 that morning, he made a smug little HOA update post blaming unexpected municipal drainage overload conditions. Municipal drainage overload, that's suburban corporate language for we catastrophically screwed up. Then day 2 hit, and that's when everything truly came apart. The second storm cell dumped almost 3 inches of rain in under 5 hours. Storm drains backed up first, then the intersection started flooding. Water rolled down the streets like shallow rivers carrying mulch, trash cans, and somebody's inflatable Christmas reindeer that apparently never got stored after the holidays. I watched a Tesla stall out halfway down Ashbury Lane while its owner stood ankle-deep in floodwater screaming into his phone about warranties. One basement window shattered under hydrostatic pressure 2 streets over. Families started hauling soaked carpet and ruined furniture onto sidewalks. You could smell sewage creeping up through overwhelmed drain systems. Insurance adjusters started appearing before the rain even stopped. Then the engineers showed up. County guys in reflective jackets walking around with tablets, measuring runoff flow, inspecting drainage maps. And I'll never forget the expression on one engineer's face when he walked into my backyard and saw the buried pond. He just stopped, looked around slowly, then said, "Who authorized removal of this retention area? Not pond, not landscaping feature, retention area." That single word changed everything instantly. Suddenly, Gerald wasn't the proud HOA king anymore. Suddenly, he was just an aging control freak standing in muddy loafers while government inspectors documented evidence. By day 3, Maple Ridge Estates looked like a disaster zone. Industrial dehumidifiers hummed non-stop from open garage doors. Entire sections of drywall were being cut out of flooded basements. Mold remediation vans lined the streets like food trucks at a festival. And every single insurance investigator kept arriving at the exact same conclusion. The flooding had become dramatically worse because runoff retention capacity had been intentionally removed without proper environmental review. In plain English, Gerald buried the neighborhood's flood protection system because he didn't like looking at fish. You genuinely cannot manufacture that level of stupid. The lawsuit started almost immediately. One family lost over $80,000 in water damage from a finished basement flood. Another homeowner had their entire electrical system destroyed. 2 elderly residents had to move into a hotel after black mold contaminated their lower floor. And every single conversation circled back to the same question. Why was the retention pond removed? By the end of that week, Gerald stopped posting HOA updates entirely. Funny how confident dictators go invisible the moment consequences arrive. Then on the 8th day after my pond was destroyed, there was a knock at my front door. I opened it and nearly laughed out loud. There stood Gerald Whitmore in knee-high rubber boots, soaked khakis, wrinkled rain jacket, dark circles under his eyes like he hadn't slept in days. The man looked like a raccoon that had lost a custody battle. Behind him, parked crooked in my driveway, sat a county engineering vehicle and an insurance consultant's SUV. Gerald tried speaking in that fake, calm HOA president voice at first, but panic was cracking through every word. "Martin, we may need to discuss restoration options regarding your pond feature." Pond feature. Amazing how terminology evolves once lawyers get involved. I leaned against the doorway and stared at him while water dripped off his boots onto my porch. Then I asked him one simple question. "How's your basement?" He closed his eyes for just a second, a tiny moment of total defeat. "There's 6 inches of water downstairs," he muttered. "Karma doesn't need GPS, it turns out." According to the county engineers, the original developer had quietly designed my property decades earlier as an unofficial overflow retention zone because it sat at the lowest natural elevation in the entire subdivision. Previous homeowners had maintained smaller water gardens there before I expanded the system into the full koi pond, which meant my pond hadn't just been beautiful, it had accidentally become critical neighborhood infrastructure. Gerald had buried infrastructure because his ego got offended by landscaping. From a legal standpoint, that is the kind of mistake attorneys frame on their office walls.
He started rambling after that. Emergency approvals, expedited reconstruction, temporary drainage corrections, basically throwing every possible solution into the air, hoping something would save him. But here's what nobody tells you about men like Gerald. They spend so much time believing they're untouchable that they completely fall apart the moment they lose leverage. And he had lost every bit of it. The HOA board was panicking. Homeowners were furious. Insurance companies needed someone to blame. County officials were actively involved. And every flooded basement in Maple Ridge Estates pointed straight back to the dirt pile sitting in my backyard. So I invited him inside, sat him down at my kitchen table, poured myself a coffee while he remained standing like a nervous teenager called into the principal's office. Then I slid a folder across the table. Because unlike Gerald, I actually prepare before making moves. Inside that folder was a full restoration proposal I had drafted with help from an environmental contractor friend of mine. Complete excavation of the buried pond system, replacement of all destroyed koi with mature imported Japanese stock, reconstruction of the biological filtration network, native aquatic plant restoration, a permanent HOA exemption protecting natural water features on my property, full liability protection against future drainage interference, and financial compensation for property destruction, plus damages tied to the loss of live animals. Gerald opened the folder and stared at the numbers. I genuinely thought the man might pass out. "This is outrageous," he whispered. I took a slow sip of coffee. "So is turning a neighborhood into Atlantis because you got jealous of a pond." Silence. Beautiful. Total silence. Then came my favorite moment of the entire ordeal. Gerald asked, very quietly, "If we agree to this, can the flooding situation be corrected?" Notice the wording. Not your flooding, not the city's flooding, the flooding situation. Ownership had finally arrived. I looked him dead in the eye and said, "The moment my retention system is restored, the runoff pressure drops immediately." That sentence hit him harder than any insult could have, because now he fully understood what he had destroyed. He signed the agreement 20 minutes later, standing in my kitchen with mud still drying on his boots. Excavation crews arrived the very next morning. Not the cheap contractors Gerald had originally hired. Real environmental restoration crews. They spent days removing contaminated fill dirt and rebuilding the basin correctly. County inspectors monitored the entire process. Drainage pipes were repaired, stone edging replaced, new filtration pumps installed. About a month later, after the water chemistry stabilized, the first koi went back in. I remember watching those fish glide through the water at sunset while the rebuilt waterfall trickled across fresh stone. And for the first time in weeks, the neighborhood sounded normal again. No generators, no dehumidifiers, no emergency vehicles. Just water flowing exactly where it was always supposed to go. Nobody in Maple Ridge Estates ever complained about my pond again after that. People started bringing their kids over to look at the fish. One family apologized personally for voting with Gerald during the HOA meetings. Gerald himself resigned as HOA president 3 months later and sold his house shortly after. Last I heard, he moved into a condo development with strict landscaping policies and absolutely no natural water features. Honestly, that sounds perfect for him. Here's what this whole thing keeps reminding me of, and I think it's worth saying plainly. Neighborhoods are basically little experiments in human psychology. Give certain people a tiny bit of authority, a clipboard, and a rule book nobody actually reads, and some of them start acting like emperors, protecting a kingdom that only exists in their own heads. And the thing is, most conflicts like this don't even start with real problems. They start with discomfort. Somebody builds something beautiful. Somebody refuses to blend into the background. And insecure people interpret individuality as rebellion. That's the actual disease underneath a lot of HOA drama. It's not about property values. It's not about mosquitoes. It's about control. My pond looked purely decorative, so people assumed it had no functional value. And that happens everywhere in life. People destroy systems they don't understand because the systems are quiet. They work invisibly until suddenly they're gone. And then everybody learns the hard way exactly why they mattered. Sometimes one retired guy with a shovel accidentally becomes the thing holding an entire neighborhood together. Not because he planned it that way, just because he paid attention, did the work, and built something real. Arrogance is expensive, especially when nature is involved. Because water does not care about HOA bylaws, neighborhood politics, or laminated warning notices zip-tied to wooden stakes. Water goes where water goes. Always. And all of this could have been avoided if one person had simply asked a question before grabbing power tools and pretending to be king of the suburbs. So now I'm curious. If you came home and found your HOA had destroyed something you spent nearly 2 decades building, what would you have done? Would you fight it in court, leave, or just let the weather handle the situation the way I did? Drop it in the comments, because after this experience I read every single HOA story people send me, and some of them are even wilder than mine. Subscribe and stick around. The next one is already on its way.